Hello and welcome back to 28storms.com. This is a special update for this April 20th, 2011. I hope everyone has been enjoying some of the severe weather coverage during these very active times. And as we head deeper into the year, not only will we continue to focus on severe weather, but we'll also be dealing with the aspect of hurricanes. And I'll tell you what, first day of hurricane season technically is June 1st, but we've seen over the past decade that tropical systems can form during almost any time of the year, and I wouldn't say that tropical development is likely. In fact, I would say it's fairly unlikely over the next week or so. But there is a fairly interesting feature out in the western Atlantic, and we'll take a very detailed look at that in just a moment. First and foremost, however, I want to point out the fact that we have seen tropical cyclone formation in the Atlantic during the month of April in the past. Now, with all that said, it's only happened one time in our recorded history since 1851. But if we look back at April 18th, 2003, Tropical Storm Anna formed just southwest of Bermuda. Now, when this storm was first classified, it was only classified as a subtropical storm, meaning it had both non-tropical and subtropical characteristics. Now, later on, the low pressure center intensified and it eventually became a full tropical storm. But this is just a precedent, and it shows that, anything is possible even during the month of April. Now, as I was saying, Anna first developed from a stalled out surface trough over the western Atlantic, and it originated from non-tropical mechanisms. It came from a mid-level trough or cold front that originated off the U.S. East Coast, and eventually it stalled over the western Atlantic, and a low pressure area began to form. And with time, as convection continued to consolidate near a surface circulation, the low pressure system made a transition from being baroclinic in nature to more barotropic and tropical, thus the reason why the Hurricane Center felt the need to upgrade. And as you can see, this was a fairly impressive storm. It peaked at around 55 knots, and we had convection developing near a closed low-level circulation. So why is this being brought up today? Well, if we look at the latest surface analysis from the National Hurricane Center and Tropical Analysis Forecast Branch, we'll see that a 1,012 millibar low has been initialized just to the northeast of Puerto Rico by about 700 miles. It's fairly weak. Again, it's only 1,012 millibars, which is hardly even strong enough to be considered a low pressure center, but nevertheless it is there, and it's also producing gale force winds. Here's a look at some satellite-derived winds, and the satellite passed over this portion of the globe earlier this morning, and it missed a good bulk share of the low-pressure area. But if you look very closely in the southeast corner, you notice that this is where we're beginning to see a surface circulation, and just north of there we're seeing gale force winds in excess of about 30 to 35 knots. In terms of actual surface observations, there really aren't that many stations in this area of the Atlantic, but nevertheless, you can make out the fact or possibility of there being a broad area of low-level surface low pressure, as we see some easterly winds just to the east of the Bahamas, with some southerly flow to the east of the Lesser Antilles. And right in this whole general area, we're going to be looking for any signs of a developing surface low. And again, our lowest surface reading here is 1,013.9 millibars, but that's a little bit removed to the east of where we think the actual surface low pressure center is located. Now here's the latest look at the Central Atlantic visible imagery, and if you look close enough, there is a weak low level circulation here, but that's not the only area that we should be looking for. Basically, any low level swirls embedded within this inverted or upside down V-shaped signature, any of those low pressure areas need to be monitored, because any single one of those could become the more dominant circulation later on. But basically, this is most certainly an area to keep a close watch on, because we do have this stalled out trough feature, and believe it or not, the models are trying to develop a subtropical storm out of this. Now, whether it actually impacts land, that's looking highly unlikely, even though it will be moving off to the west, but we'll go into some of that in just a moment. Also, here's a look at the latest infrared imagery, and there's really nothing all that impressive at the moment. There's really not that many cold cloud tops, although within the last few hours we've seen an increase in convection over this low-level swirl, and that's most certainly the one or primary feature to be watching at this current time. Here's just another look at the shortwave infrared, and you can still make out that low-level circulation with some of the highest convection just to the north, and that's where the satellite is picking up the gale force winds. Also, here's a look at the latest water vapor imagery, and this is most certainly not a favorable pattern if you're looking for tropical development. We have the stalled upper level trough located just to the north. The SIMS wind shear analysis is showing westerly flow at about 50 to 60 knots. And not only that, but it's ushering in so much dry air. This is bone dry air in the mid-levels of the atmosphere just streaming into this system. Here is that SIMS shear analysis. As you can see, there's a strong low-level, or mid-level I should say, westerly flow with 50 to 60 knots of wind shear. It can also be depicted pretty well on this graphic. Basically, anything that is not blue is unfavorable because the winds are too strong, and as you can see, that's a strong jet racing out of the Greater Antilles and the Bahamas area. Here's another look at the moisture content in the atmosphere. This is what we call the precipitable water parameter from the SIMS website, and there's a lot of dry air over the central and western Atlantic, although there is some low-level moisture trying to be pumped in to that low-level feature from the surface trough in points further south, so we'll keep an eye on that. And also, here's a latest look at the sea surface temperatures, and you may be wondering, how is it even possible that we could get any type of tropical development during April when it seems like the temperatures would simply be too cold? Well, that is partially true. If we look in the general area of where our surface low pressure is trying to form, it's just to the north of the 26 degrees Celsius isotherm, and usually if you want true tropical development, you would have to be looking at points further south where it's warmer than 78 to 80 degrees in terms of water temperatures. But like I said, this is not a fully tropical system, and it probably never will become one. If this is subtropical in nature, it doesn't have to have water temperatures above 78 to 80 for it to intensify, and I'll explain that in just a moment as well. So here's a quick model rundown. This is the 0Z ECMWF. We see our broad trough of low pressure to the northeast of the Greater Antilles. 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 96 hours. So you can see that the model doesn't do a whole lot with our low pressure system, but especially at 72 hours, as this surface ridge begins to develop over the Canadian Maritimes and New England, this surface low becomes trapped, and it does intensify in the short term before beginning to become more elongated and open up back again as it drifts off to the west toward the Bahamas and southern Florida. This is by day 6. Now, taking a quick look at the GFS, if I can rewind this, and we'll start from the current day, we will see, if you bear with me for just a moment. Okay, this is the current time, 24 hours, 48 hours. You see the model is trying to develop the low, but it's not doing a very good job of it. By 72 hours, it looks like some of the energy will split to the northeast as it becomes picked up by a trough, and the remaining portion of the low pressure area continues off toward the west, much the same way as the European shows. Here is a quick look at the Canadian model, if we'll also rewind this one. Okay, so this is the current time frame. As we go into the future, you will notice that the Canadian is most bullish, more bullish than any other particular model. This is 24 hours. We begin to see a very prominent area of low pressure. By 48 hours, this looks highly suspect. If this were to actually come true, this is the equivalent of a true tropical storm, possibly even a strong one based on how they normally look in the dynamical model forecasts. By 72 hours, you can see this low being trapped by the ridge to the north, or high pressure, surface high, and by 96 hours, it's continuing westward toward the Bahamas area and in the general direction of the southeast United States. Also, this is the the UK Met model, and as we go into the future, this is 30 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours. You can see the model is making a run at intensifying the system, although pretty much all of the models except for the Canadian keep it relatively weak, which is to be expected, and by 96 hours, it's weakening as it begins to traverse through the Bahamas. And finally, this is the no-gaps model, probably the least accurate out of the ones that I'm showing you today, but it's always worth looking at all the models. By 48 and 72 hours, it does show intensification along with a general weakening thereafter as it continues westward toward the Bahamas and Florida. So that is basically your model consensus. Now you may be wondering, well, is what the model is showing, is it a fully tropical low, or is this simply non-tropical in nature? Well, one thing that gives this a signal right away is that many of the models show all of the isobars being relatively close together, which would be a good signal that this is at least halfway tropical in nature. And also the cyclone phase diagram analysis from the Florida State webpage will show you that most of the models actually all the models keep the system warm core or tropical in nature. This is the ECMWF, excuse me, and it's keeping the storm symmetric warm core, and you notice the trend in all of the models. This is the GFS model. It's a little bit more cold core than the European, but still halfway symmetric warm core, and also the Canadian is keeping the system warm core, which is obviously the look that it gave us on the sea level pressure charts. And finally the UK Met and no gaps. So all of these models are showing at least a subtropical storm over the next 3 to 4 days. So what is the bottom line? Alright, well, this is the 500 millibar GFS vorticity map. This is the current time. Basically, these yellow areas denote areas of positive vorticity, which is cyclonic circulation, and the middle areas are the atmosphere. And basically what this mid-level trough that's appearing in this general area is doing is it's generating that strong vertical wind shear, which is causing convection to develop near this circulation due to upper level divergence. Now basically all that means is that this is being developed by non-tropical characteristics. Now over time though, the models are showing convection persisting near the center long enough to where it actually does develop a warm core surface circulation, but over time, however, this upper level trough that you see here will begin to lift toward the northeast. See, there's a much larger long wave trough passing over the northern Atlantic, and it's going to pick up this area of troughiness, and it's going to be pulled toward the northeast. And you can't see it on this map, but near the surface, the actual circulation that we're looking at over here will be in this general area. And once it's over here, it will have no mid-level forcing to enhance the circulation any further, and it will have to rely on purely tropical characteristics to survive. The problem with that, though, is that as we've seen, the vertical winds, the wind shear, and sea surface temperatures are not favorable enough this time of the year to sustain a true tropical low. So therefore, this does have an outside shot at becoming subtropical over the next couple days, but even if it became named, as it moved more toward the west and had to rely on itself to remain an intense surface low, it will not be able to do so, and the circulation will weaken as it comes into the Bahamas and Florida. So just to recap, this area does have a slight chance at becoming a subtropical system over the next 72 hours, although it would be fairly weak and the chances are less than 50%. And even if the storm did develop, it would weaken to open circulation as it continues toward the Bahamas and possibly southern Florida. So thanks again for visiting 28storms.com. Check back soon for more severe weather updates across the Southeast and Tornado Alley along with the Midwest. And as we inch closer to hurricane season, we will have more hurricane news, including the hurricane seasonal forecast released exclusively by 28storms.com toward the end of May. And then by June 1st, we'll be doing routine daily tropical weather updates throughout the remainder of hurricane season. So thanks again for checking out 28storms.com. Please spread the word and check back soon for more information.